Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, I have Dr. Nuri Jeong, and she is a neuroscience-based peak performance for entrepreneurs and leaders. She's the founder of Goal Coach and a founder and goal coach of Goals Unhindered. And we're going to be diving today into the fascinating intersection between neuroscience and peak performance. So, as a neuroscientist herself and this founder from Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, with a rich background in goal-directed learning and motivated decision making, Dr. Jeong leverages over a decade of neuroscience research to empower entrepreneurs and leaders to achieve this kind of holistic success. So her approach uniquely blends rigorous scientific insight with compassionate, human-centered coaching, making complex neuroscience accessible and actionable. So from pioneering virtual reality tasks for memory formation studies to her transformative work as a goal coach, she's here to share how understanding our brains can unlock unparalleled productivity and fulfillment. So let's explore the neuroscience behind peak performance and how we all might be able to integrate these insights into our daily lives. So my first question I've got for you is, share something that you're grateful for or a positive focus of the last week. So in the last week, something that you're grateful for or a positive focus. I'd love to just start the energy there.
Oh, I love this question. Gratitude is the start of everything, and I do this every day. Gratitude exercise, sharing 3 things that you're grateful for every single day. I would say I am definitely grateful for my partner who's so passionate, understanding, and patient with me. We're both entrepreneurs, and so I have a lot of gratitude for him. In the past week, I've been connected with so many people in the community, especially with the St. Patrick's parade in Atlanta, which I really, really enjoyed. And just the energy that I get from people. I thrive by responding to people's energy in my environment, and I love that. I love the connection that I can build through my business, through my personal relationships. So yeah, I'm just grateful for people.
Do you think part of that was the amount of places you lived in an early age? So you moved a lot, right? In Korea, 10, 15 odd places before moving to the US. Do you think that had an impact on this ability to connect with people and in the different places that you lived, maybe?
That's a really good question. I would say because my parents were divorced when I was very young, I now say that my parents were training me for me to adapt better in the United States, because in the past when I was living in Korea, I moved probably 10 plus times, before I moved when I was 15 alone to the US. And so I had this keen ability to connect with people because I had to survive. Find the common ground fast, and being able to connect with people, learn their culture, learn their language. And yes, I think it does help me to relate. And I think that really helped me connect with my clients, connect with new friends, and always making new friendships is really my passion.
That's a huge move for anybody to do, right? At a young age, to go to a completely different culture, completely different language. If you can cast your mind to that experience, what were the things that were bang on of your, I expect this and I found it and felt it, to I expected it and it was way different? What were some of the things that you expected to experience when you moved to the US that were, bang on, and what was actually very different to your expectations and thought of how it might be?
Wow. My first year, I remember going to Walmart for the first time. And let me tell you, I guess I didn't know, I knew that America was large, very large. But the size, the scale of things was just, I couldn't wrap my head around the kinds and the number of different types of cereals in the cereal aisle or cheeses. Like all those things were just amazing to me. the types of options that people create, and just gave me anxiety thinking about, okay, which one do I use, right, out of all these different things. So that was a big surprise, a pleasant surprise. And, I always think back to my first time having I don't know, ice cream or something. It was like, I used to get baby size ice cream because that's what I'm used to. And now I am able to finish a big pint of ice cream with no problem. So
that's the American influence, right? Everything's large.
I don't know if it's a good thing.
So this sense of extreme overwhelm, of options, of size, of things that are different. I want to just touch on that a little bit more in terms of that sense of, wow, it was overwhelming. It was stressing you out of those situations. How did you deal with that? What were maybe some of your coping mechanisms back then, before all your academic career, before all your insights around coaching? What were the things that you were doing to try and deal with that transition?
I remember being in class where I was just kind of standing out without having to try, because I was the only one of, I think, handful of Asian persons in the entire school. It was very white dominated in the middle of Connecticut. And I remember feeling really happy in a way that I could stand out without having to try much, and being able to, connect with people just because I look different. And this is long before having any perception of racism or any of that stuff, and thinking about, oh, what a great thing that I have the superpower that I can just show up, out of the crowd. I think that perception helped me, because it helped me block those potentially unwanted thoughts about how someone could view me and how that could affect my future decisions, and really thinking about, what do I want? How do I want to present myself into this world, and what do I want to learn? And that was my focus, and having that perception really helped me focus on things that really needed to be done, which is, looking up every other words in the dictionary, because I didn't understand what was going on in class for a long time until I could understand. About 6 months into the class, I finally understood a few words, kind of connecting the dots, and actually understanding what's happening in the book. So it was a struggle, but it also was kind of a fun in the mystery of, oh, wow, that there's a surprises that I'm finding myself into. So having the ability to look at it in a different perspective, and kind of block out even the unknowingly blocking out those unwanted thoughts, and also focusing on what I could do.
It's fascinating to, hear different people's stories, right, about situations, and then how do we respond? Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes unintentional. Like you said, the naivety, just curiosity of thinking, hey, I stand out. Isn't that cool? And using that to an advantage. And those strategic decisions, as we mature, as we gain more experience, do we fight something with friction and force it through, or do we actually allow that and pivot and flow? It's a bit like judo, right? Judo is about taking the other person's strength and energy to use against them, rather than trying to meet it with equal or more force. And these different kind of philosophies or viewpoints or perspectives really shape our futures, right? Shape what is presented, what opportunities are there, what do we actually see? And so take me through a little bit of your next stage career of education, because you've spent a long time in academia, a lot of study, a lot of research in and around the brain. Why the brain? Why neuroscience? Why those sorts of things? And talk us through a few of the highlights that you've experienced.
Why the brain? That was kind of fell in my lap. I was studying a variety of different scientific research. I, went to a kind of a small liberal arts school that didn't have a big scientific community. And so I sought out opportunities to do research, because that was something that I was passionate about. I knew that I wanted to be a biologist from the get-go. I knew in Korea I wanted to be either a diplomat or a biologist. So using language as a tool for me to travel and meet people and learn about the body. So being a biologist was one of the goals, and I took science classes seriously. And going through different research, I had an opportunity to work in a neuroscience lab at Columbia after I graduated as a research assistant for a few years. And that's where I learned about this power of basically seeing into the brain and see what's happening in the brain. I was making a tool, a small electrode that you can put into the mouse brain to detect the dopamine level changes in real time. And it was so fascinating because I could tell immediately when the mouse gets a reward, you can see the dopamine level go up immediately. And I'm like, wow, your external behavior can be detected and quantified and studied using tools like that was fascinating to me. And I got completely hooked using dopamine terms. And I thought, okay, now that I was studying how dopamine relates to learning, how things are encoded in the brain, as a natural extension of the study, I thought, I'll be interested in learning about addiction because it's kind of excessive learning or maladaptive goal-directed approach. And I wanted to understand why this is happening and how we can revert that behavior in humans. And I went into grad school thinking that I would be doing that. And then I realized, hey, actually, this is more fun to study the basic mechanisms of the learning itself. How does learning happen? How does new information get changed into more familiar information that we know as knowledge? And that's where I started digging into more the mechanisms into it and what different cell types are involved in it and things like that. And I think thinking back on it, my research dissertation actually is called Goals Unhindered. It's in my company name is based off of it because it encompasses a lot of the aspects that I've studied and I've experienced personally in my life. And I've been a learner all my life, and I really captured in that phrase.
In terms of then, walk us through a little bit of this for people who aren't maybe familiar with some of these terms, of what dopamine does, the impact of, say, goal-directed learning, because from regulatory focus theory, or I had a previous guest, you may know of him or heard of him, George Paxanos, the neuroscientist. In fact, he's, I think he's got the most number of citations in Science. It's 73,000 citations of his book that you may have come across, the rat brain in stereotaxic coordinates. He was the author of that study. So he's named more brain parts than any other human in history. And, we're still only at the, surface of understanding now how it really functions and how it works. So I'm curious, walk us through what you mean by goal-directed learning and the link between goals, dopamine, and learning, and that transition to, as you said, more familiar and knowledge-based. Just walk us through a little bit of some of that, and then we'll dive in a bit deeper.
Yeah, so goal-directed learning is a subject, an individual, whether human or a mouse, knows what they want and goes towards it. There's an approach. There's also the reward perspective, which is where the dopamine comes in, being able to observe something that you like, and then remembering that, what kind of path did you take to get to that site of reward reception, and how can we go back to it using that memory? That's where the learning and memory comes in. And you can do that in multiple different environments. I used both in real life and also kind of in real life as a more of a Pavlovian conditioning kind of a paradigm. And I've also done in a virtual reality environment where, when I say virtual reality in mice, everybody thinks that mice actually has the goggles on and things, but it's not like that. It's more like there's a kind of a surrounding that mice is exposed to. And as they move on a treadmill, they move themselves forward in the virtual environment automatically. In that way, they are put into this immersive experience that we can then detect how they navigate in different environments. So I've done that both in real world and also virtual reality world.
And what are the key learnings to transition from those studies into then humans? And what led you, a lot of work in the academic world and then a transition into coaching. What was the moment that you said, okay, I think this is my next chapter for me? Was there an event? Was there a trigger? Was there a point in which your academic career highlighted through some research, this is where I want to focus now? What was some of the triggers for that?
I knew that in my graduate studies, I've always felt this inkling of I want to help as many people as possible. I want to impact and make a direct impact that I can actually see happening in the world. And I felt it was so far from the human research, human lives, while working on mice. And I wanted to look at different opportunities where I can help people more directly and more in real time. And coaching also kind of fell in my lap in a way. I would say this isn't something that I wished on anybody, but I was hit by an SUV while I was walking, crossing a street about a year, almost 2 years ago now. And it was my final year of PhD where I was really focused on my dissertation, my papers, my grants, applications, all these things. And at the time, I was also working on my immigration program. So it was just a lot of things happening at once. And this thing where I injured my leg, I had to have a surgery. I was completely immobilized, bedridden for a few months. And, since then, I've completely recovered and I can walk. I'm very, very thankful. I tell people that it happened the best way it could have happened because, just there's so many little things that could have gone wrong, worse, and I wouldn't be here to share the story. So I am very grateful for that event, but of course, I don't think anyone has to go through this kind of traumatic event to realize their time is limited and their energy is limited. And that kind of forced me to see my life from a far perspective where I can kind of step back and see what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? And what can I do to make this life more impactful? And I decided I pull myself through this darkness I was having at the time, financial struggles, physical strains, and emotional burden all at the same time. And trying to get through that moment was my impatience, actually, because I realized, hey, I don't want to wait for somebody to accept me. I don't want to wait for someone to approve my papers or give me a job or, the external validation that I was seeking all my life, now I recognized. And now I want to turn that tables around and say, hey, I want to be the main driver of this life. And I want to do something that I can control and start walking towards the future, which is I want to impact as many people as possible in a more direct way that I can measure. And coaching was a perfect fit because of my personality traits, because of my passion for people and learning different people's stories and helping people go through a kind of a difficult times in their life, whether it be in personal relationships, their business, their career, and seeing that and the breakthroughs that you can see immediately within a session. It's such a rewarding experience. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? That those mini moments where there are epiphanies, where there's breakdowns or breakthroughs, where there's an unraveling, which is a positive part from that all complex mess to actual clarity of what's being revealed. And you have, of course, a very unique perspective on things from looking at, how our memories formed and rapid memory forming and what impact a type of goal is. So if, there's lots of different ways we set goals, right? We can set them by just personal, we can share them, we can make them smart. They can be so big that actually it becomes overwhelming and anxious. We can have, goal hierarchy, all of these different parts. From your perspective of looking at it, of how it creates new memories or how it creates an approach to learning new possibilities and learning new things, what are some of the techniques or tactics or things that you could walk us through or help us maybe have a new relationship with goals through some of your research and some of your work?
my main thing is have a different relationship with failure. I can talk about the story of how quickly I got hit by a car and how that relates to the fast learning. When I was first hit, it literally took me a minute from, the time that I was texting my boyfriend, hey, pick me up at this location at this time. And then literally a minute after calling him, hey, pick me up now. And this is, and what was going through in my head within that period, and I was hit and it was on the ground was, I could not yell or shout. And what I decided to focus on was the teenage brothers that were in the car. It was driven by a young teenage boy and his younger brother, who was bawling his eyes out. And looking at them being very sorry and crying, I could not be upset at them. I could not be, feeling angry at them. I felt bad for them because it was just as traumatic experience for them as it was for me. And now I hope that this experience helped them to become more careful drivers, which I believe we will. But I also recognize how this sudden change in the environment can help you focus, especially the negative thoughts or negative events that happen. I realized even as a person, a pedestrian, I recognized a few days later how many different cuts and minor things that happened on my body besides the major broken leg that I didn't even feel the pain for, because at the time I was so shocked and I couldn't even cry. I couldn't even, manage my emotions, except that I'm just telling myself to breathe. And I tried to keep myself awake the whole time and really allocated my attention on things that really mattered. And I chose that moment to focus on things like the brother, feeling sorry for them instead of feeling sorry for me. And I think of goals the same way. I think of these periods where you feel like you're having a setback or a failure or rejection. And if you're an academic, you're going to relate to this. You are going to fail a lot. In an experimentalist, every day you're failing something. And quite honestly, if you're not, then maybe you're not, doing something innovative enough. I was failing a lot, and now I recognize it as a way to focus on what can work and what can I do to make this, more optimized. And just taking it day by day, you have a big vision, but then you also have a daily focus of what's going to move the needle, not focus on how many hours or how much time am I spending on this, but really focusing on, am I going in the right direction? And also having a focus on daily 3 goals. These are the things that I'm going to focus on with my intention, whether it be family, personal development, relationship, fun, finance, career, health. Health is a big thing that I had been neglecting my entire life until that happened, and I was forced to take care of myself and my body. And really having that clear vision for your life entirety, not just one thing, one business goal, making this much money or making that kind of deal or, relationship. I think that every day we get a choice to do something different, to see things in a different way and respond to things in a different way. And one of 3 things is do nothing, do something that you can do, or do something that other people tell you to do, right? And making those decisions help you move closer and closer to the vision that you have, which should be clear to you.
I'm interested in terms of when these things happen in our life, when we set a goal and something happens, in the brain. So if we're getting closer towards it, my assumption, my belief is we will have the positives, we'll have dopamine, we'll have a hit. I'm making progress. I'm working towards it, and that will encourage me. It'll increase certain things and decrease others, right? Reduce the amount of cortisol or stress. It'll help me learn, help me think broader. I will, have actual rational parts. If I then have a negative experience, call it a failure, call it a car hitting me, call it a, hey, no, I'm not funding your project, or whatever it might be. What happens in the brain, from at worst case, amygdala hijack, and we're, shutting down and we're just in a certain point of survival mode? Where are the things that we might be able to manipulate the way in which we respond effectively to that failure, where our biology might maybe let us down, maybe makes it difficult to learn, makes it difficult to see a perspective of opportunity versus a perspective, I'm not good enough, this wasn't right, so that we're laying the right kind of memories down versus a memory, oh, I never walk on a pedestrian, I never walk near a road again, right? Could have been a memory that was laid down because of that experience. So I'll never try that again. How do we work with our brain to work for us, not necessarily against us, in situations like failure? I'd be keen on your perspective.
I absolutely love this question, because when I was studying novelty learning or rapid new learning, fear learning is a mechanism. It's actually one of the most robust forms of learning, because, when a mouse gets it gets like a foot shock, it will freeze. And then the mouse will learn to associate whatever environment, whether the cue, auditory cues, or tactile smells, all of those, when they got a foot shock, is going to remember and freeze even in a different context. And so it's such a big, fast
The
form
circuit's
of
made.
learning.
They
Yeah,
fire together, wire together, whichever the stimulus is, that same thing. Even if
exactly.
another few bits have changed, environment, new person, different modality, it still fires off and goes, right?
Right. And there's a lot of memory circuits, especially you mentioned amygdala. This is very much involved in basically detecting potential threat as much as already having experiencing the threats, right? And some people call this the smoke detector zone because it's already detecting potential threats in the environment and then preventing that. And, while it's a helpful thing for survival, you don't want to do nothing when the tiger is charging at you. But also you recognize, how often do you see that in the modern times in their
A
daily life?
tiger in virtual on the TV show versus a tiger in your living room. And sometimes our brain can't figure the difference, right, in the way it responds at work. Oh, it feels like this is the end, but all it was is somebody just didn't agree with you. And yet the brain fires in the same sort of way as if it was a tiger, but actually it was just somebody who told me that wasn't very good what you did. And so I think that's a real challenge that people face right now, right? Is that they don't realize the level of, of corrosive stress that they're under and that they're going and they're living through.
And it's so true. People recognizing the difference between whether this is actual survival instinct or if it's constructive feedback, right? Or if it's someone who really cares for me, that trying to get me to do better. And so when you have that feeling, always remember, when someone is about to present, just saying the word, I'm excited, as opposed to I'm nervous. Just saying that one word, one sentence right before you're presenting, that changes your experience a bit. It changes the perception of how you're going to perform. Because even though the chemical cocktails are probably pretty similar between fearful.
Same physiological
Yeah.
actions, but two different viewpoints in that paradox. Yeah.
Exactly. And instead of getting fearful about what's to come or what hasn't happened yet, but you're worried about it, or something that did happen and you're worried about something happening again, getting worked up about it isn't going to help you. So instead, what Dr. Rebecca Heiss is one of the renowned biologists, talks about fear in this, and goes to speak to different corporate trainings for it. She talks about the importance of curiosity. When you are curious, when you ask questions, no matter how dumb it might sound, just thinking about the one question you can think of: why is the ceiling always white? Like, why is it always white? Right? No matter how dumb it might sound, when you have that curiosity mindset, you start to see it as more of a, oh, that's interesting, instead of, ooh, that's something to be fearful about.
And I think a couple of the other techniques I've heard of in terms of creating distance between it and you. You know, I am nervous versus I'm noticing nervousness in me, or I'm feeling nervous, rather than labeling it as me. And also the power of that framing, of the labeling, you know, excited versus nervous, the power of how we frame, how we label, and whether we associate it with us, and it's always us. I'm no good with technology. I'm no good with languages, and perpetuating that circuit all the time, because every time I do it, or I make a failure, oh, see, told you so, or I get a bit of feedback from somebody that didn't get a promotion, didn't get a check written, didn't get to work on that project, that further perpetuates it, versus a re-engineer of that experience through curiosity, through labeling, through a way in which we can, you know, experience an opportunity for, it's just a moment of time, B, it's a perspective, and both things can be true that are opposites at the same time, you know, and that's talked a lot around mental flexibility and cognitive flexibility. And then we have the other part, which is the emotional felt experience, right? The semantic parts, all of these different aspects, that the signals that we either miscommunicate with ourselves. So coming back to, I want to touch a little bit more onto the virtual reality stuff. So you talked about that within the research of mice, giving them an environment, and then they were able to move the virtual environment by the action in the physical sense. What are the opportunities here for learning and applied for peak performance, for coaching, that either you're excited about, working in, interested in, a VR for goals, for trying things out? Just talk me through some of your thoughts in that area.
You know, we have such a great opportunities for this space, and there are so many companies working on VR gaming and educational gaming form. It brings the learner into a different context, and you can have a more experiential learning that way that isn't possible always in a classroom. And so one of the things that I want to highlight is, you know, learning can happen at anywhere, but imagination is something that really hard to teach for some people. And so when you can bring the context into someone and bring the natural curiosity to someone to think and you know, actually see the impact of what you do in a non-physical world, in a virtual world, you can remember that. You can remember something that hasn't happened, that can happen. It's unlikely to happen in real life, but you've interacted with it, and you were going to encode that memory into something that's very special into the brain, because it is novel. And so there's always the effect of novelty in learning something rapidly, and not only novelty, but also salience. You know, this is something cool. It is not only new, but something is fun, and it's important, and I'm going to encode this information in a way that I can remember later. And I just love the opportunities that there is in the virtual reality and learning space. Another aspect that I find exciting is the empathy. I know of at least one company that has created this VR form training tools for people with Alzheimer's or someone with another disorder. And these people, is for both the patients and the caregivers. So you can be in a surrounding, you can see through the environment through the eyes of a patient that you might not be able to otherwise recognize. As a doctor, as a caregiver, it's very hard to know what it's like to be a patient, and to give you the access, give those people the access and see what they need, how they see the world is such a big game changer. And the patients themselves can use that tool to connect with people. I've seen so many patients feeling even more connected, and they feel the sense of belonging just by being able to interact with technology. And just imagine, you know, it's already good, but how much better it will get in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of two things, right? One, where you talked about empathy, reframing and understanding. So seeing different perspectives and using VR to do that when it might be inaccessible, inappropriate, or difficult to do some of those things. Another part is around peak performance. And, you know, I know there's been a lot of stuff and studies around visualization. You know, race car drivers will visualize the circuit time and time again, skiing people, ski jumpers, all of this visualize, rehearse in the mind, in the brain, as much as they then do physically, and it will increase performance. Same in terms of we can affect our physicality just through mind thought. So, you know, a lot of Joe Dispenza's work and things, we can visualize training a muscle and just go through the act of thought process of training it without the physical movement and have effects, physical effects without a physical, you know, modality of doing it. So the power of how we can start to understand and manipulate the functioning, going from dysfunction and dis-ease to actually healthy parts, there is so much power to unlock with the mind. And maybe this can be another opportunity of virtual reality around peak performance to allow exposure to things, to scenarios, to situations, to, in one part, normalize them. And in another part, will it actually help us to achieve peak performance by practicing it in those areas? A bit like esports or gaming, you know, that they can transfer and, hey, I've done 10,000 hours on a flight simulator. Can I now fly? But I've never been in a plane. So I'm fascinated as, what's the distinction of the pathways or the learning between a virtual and physical? Is it one and the same? Do we know the answer to that? I'm fascinated.
You know, quite similar, but the way I study virtual reality, there's quite differences in the brain region that is important for learning and memory, which is called hippocampus. And there's, you know, complexities behind and how different neurons and things react to virtual reality versus real environment cues are different, but very similar. Just like how much a neuron fires in one environment versus other is pretty similar, is something that people have talked about and looked at. And also things like place cells. These are the cells that get activated when you're moving in an environment, and they code and act as a GPS system, basically, and get activated when you're in one location, even in an environment versus another. And in the same, you know, there's a group of scientists that have generated a virtual reality environment and then a real world environment that looks basically the same, and saw that the effects are pretty much the same, that the place cells do exist and they react pretty similarly, although there is a slight differences. But that highlights the importance of being able to use and actually leveraging the technology in virtual reality in the studies of spatial navigation, for example, or even motor learning. And one thing that I wanted to mention, going back to the mental imagery part, visualization, and why I think that virtual reality could be a good, a useful tool for doing it, is not only the imagination, but also there's a separate part of activation or motor observation part. There's a study that came out in Frontier and Cognition, I believe, recently, that talked about, you know, it's not only the visualization, but the observation together is actually is going to help activate the brain regions that are involved in motor preparation. So, you know, premotor areas are something that, you know, help you prepare the movement. And so when you're observing someone or a video or you yourself, or watching someone move versus actually imagining it and doing it at the same time, observing and imagining in your head what the steps of the movement is like, is going to help you activate the brain regions involved much more into the greater degree. And it may be actually more effective in terms of in achieving your peak performance that way. And so it's not just one or the other, whether it's, you know, how
they're a multiplier.
Yeah,
that compound each other. I think is interesting. And it's an area that is so fascinating because we've got, you know, pioneers now having access to research, to collaborate, different technologies. I remember, I don't know if you've ever come across Mary Lou Jepsen and any of her work. Absolutely fascinating, some of her work over time. One of the early people pioneering holographic imaging. She now has a project called Open Water. I don't know if you've come across Open Water, about being able to increase the fidelity of brain imaging. So from MRI scans to now devices that are orders of magnitude greater fidelity at orders of magnitude less cost. And a lot of this is open source for research about what we can see, whether it's looking at, the blood flow in the brain, whether it's looking at, different areas of access to things. So I'd encourage people to just check out Open Water, really, really fascinating. And when I first met her, I was just blown away by her own story of why she came into this, because of her daughter who had a neurological challenge. And so has Mary Lou along the way. And a lot of the breakthroughs come from this absolute passion to solve something, a passion to solve something. I want to impact as many people as I can. And I'm curious about not only learning and how we can increase performance, but also unlearning. And the concept of, okay, we've got these circuits that wire together and I practice it. I visualize it, I repeat it. When I was, learning how to pronounce your name, when we learn these things, we repeat it. New language, we repeat it. And we're, increasing the myelin sheath around the connections so that it can fire efficiently and effectively. When that's no longer something we want to have, i.e. the relationship we have, that bang goes off and I have PTSD and I'm suddenly in a situation, that's a bad kind of lay down of a memory, and I want to unlearn that. What are some of the things we could do if we want to create new memories from similar stimulus that have been in the past? Are there techniques, are there things that we can do to maybe create different pathways, either with or without psychedelics, or various different things that can help us in these areas? I'm curious about how we can unlearn, how we can recreate different pathways for experiences that have been potentially negative for us, a trauma, PTSD, these kinds of things, failure to reposition them. Is there both biological things we can do as well as cognitive things that we might be able to do?
We unlearn by relearning. So at the end of the day, we have to make different associations. And I want to bring into the concept of extinction in the behavior science. And people do extinction studies all the time, where you have a certain stimulus that predicts a certain outcome. Let's say a foot shock, or let's say some sort of odor or auditory cue, and then the mouse gets a foot shock. And that's a clear association the mouse learns within a session, right? But then to unlearn that, basically what the experimenter has to do is have a random cues, or there's no timing effect of like a consistent interval of when that outcome happens after a cue. And when that cue is no longer predictable and reliable, the mouse certainly learns to basically discount that information, and it doesn't start to not freeze. And in it, essentially, they're relearning a different association with the cue. And I see the same thing that happens with humans. People talk about whether it's a desensitization or flooring effect of when you have a traumatic event. How can we unlearn that by, exposing yourself to the greater degree, so that you no longer see that as a threatening thing, like a loud sound that might trigger you experience of potentially a PTSD events in a war. But in a daily situation, it's important to expose yourself to the environment where you're going to have a different relationship with them, or learning to change the timing of it, like what's going to happen is actually not based on the cue. Relearning that is important. So in the synaptic sense in the brain, what's happening is, we have neurons that can make different synaptic connections daily, right? And you're making those stronger synapses that you're trying to unlearn weaker. You're trying to make those connections weaker. And to do that, you have to make other connections stronger, so that it's more likely that this other connection, the other association, is going to come about sooner and more efficiently rather than the other one. And through repetition, by learning, and you make this other association much more likely than the other one.
So that transition of dissonance, of creating distance between that trigger by making it less predictable, more uncertain, and giving an intentional other effect. So it could be, you know, repeating something, but having a different tonality to it to give us different points. It could be different facial expressions, I guess. You're smiling when actually something's not right, so that we're creating different experiences. Does that translate that we get better at it, or do we have to do it every time that we want to deal with something? I.e., can I just go, all right, I'm better at doing this because I've done a few of these things. I've, you know, reassociated an experience. Every relationship I've had, it's always been bad. Whereas I go and intentionally go, oh, this is a relationship, there's a good thing. I write that down. I, you know, overwhelm with the data of the reassociation that relationships aren't always bad, or a conversation I have with my mum or my dad or whatever is good or bad, that we find them. Is it about writing them? Is it overwhelming? Do we have to do it every time that we need to do it? Or is there a cumulative effect that helps us do that more often? Is there
Increase
short?
that. There's even a task called evidence accumulation. You increase the evidence that what you're doing is actually what you believe, right? And it's also part of the cognition confirmation bias, is that you tend to seek out information that seems to support your hypothesis, right? Support your way of thinking. You know, if you go into a dating scene thinking that, oh, all men are bad, they're all going to be cheating on me, then you're probably going to likely find an evidence for that argument. But if you go in with a curiosity and open mind and say, hey, I know I've had this experience, but that was a one bad experience, and I'm going to find something that I know, you know, what first thing is like, okay, I'm going to find early signs of potential incompatibility. I'm going to find this type of people, and you get to filter out information much more effectively rather than being scared of, you know, putting yourself out there. I always go back into, whenever I'm scared of trying something new, I always go back on one of the first decisions I had to make as an international student back in when I was 15. I was in a class that was so freaking hard. I had to read old English and I didn't understand what was going on in class. And it was honors history and English at the same time. And my teachers came to me and said, you know, I think it would be best if you switch out of the class and find something easier. When I heard that, I had a lot of thoughts in my head. On one hand, I'm like, oh, that's going to make my life easier because I don't have to read through this dictionary and, you know, find words in the dictionary until 3 a.m. every day. And I would probably be better, you know, feeling more confident and confident just going into an easier class. But then another voice in my head said, if I don't do this right now, am I ever going to feel the courage to, you know, to fight this back again, to challenge this thing again? Am I going to learn? And I ended up staying in the class, and I worked my feathers off, and I, you know, did my work, and I was able to finish the class, you know, flying colors. And I always go back into the thought process I had as a 15-year-old, thinking, I know this is going to be, always an easier route out, but is that going to be the best thing for me to learn? Is that going to give me the best opportunities? Am I also going to be a different person to face another challenge in a similar way? You know, I always go back and I try to do something that is going to scare me, and I know that's where I'm going to learn the most.
Yeah, it's the gift to the future self, right? Am I serving my future self
Yes.
in this? And you know, for many people right now in certain parts of their lives, it can feel very overwhelming. Coming back to, you know, when things are hard at work, dealing with different things. We've had to deal with a lot. We've had to deal with not only, you know, technological advances, societal shifts, political things going on, that all of this can seem very, very overwhelming. And therefore, brain responds in that way. And actually, we're then impaired to function. We're impaired to even set good goals, let alone fail well and achieve them and all of those things. So getting into a state where we have a moment of peace, a moment of calm, a moment of coherence can help us through that. So we go from despair to positive, from inaction to action. That is very helpful with that hope. And I'm curious that, as we come to the, final stages of our conversation, the areas for people, and you work a lot, right, with entrepreneurs, with leaders, with people who are seeking peak performance. When they're in a state of overwhelm, is peak performance just not on the table because we're in overwhelm? Do we need to do the baby reps first before we do that? Or is that possible? Because I think a lot of people we speak to feel under incredible pressure, incredible uncertainty, an awful lot of opportunity, but don't know where to go and how to decide and make the right decisions as leaders, because it's going to affect a lot of people. And so coming back to how you approached it, of will this help, will this serve, and it's going to be hard, what other things can they do in the way in which they maybe organize their goals, they unhinder them in certain ways, that people can do, some practical actions as we come to a close?
Yeah, one of the things I recognize while working with individuals who are extremely ambitious and high performing in their own right, and they are very stressed. And we tend to think about these obstacles as an external thing, but more often than not, it's actually internal. It's our internal challenges and blockages or negative feelings that we have about ourselves that are blocking our action. One thing I ask them is, what if this is the best thing that happened to you? What if this is the greatest power that gives you? What if this is, it gives you the wings that you didn't know you had, right? And that changes it. It forces them to think in a different way rather than seeing this thing, that blockage or wall, as a thing to break through, but rather, okay, actually this gives me the ladder for me to go above and beyond and do something different. And that's a perception change, right? And then once you have that change in perception, we start thinking about what is possible, what else is possible, what can I do, what is, if I don't have enough resources, because we're always limited in money, time, and our energy, what else is possible that we can be more resourceful in? And we start to analyze things, collect data, collect evidence, collect things that we can test out our own ways of thinking and our own ways of possibilities, and we act. So perception, cognition, and action are the three things that I use as a framework to help people to understand, how can I get out of this? Not just this environmental challenge that you see as an external, but how can I level up myself? Peak performance, I think, it get a lot of bad rap in that you have to maintain this high efficient, productivity state at all times. But as we know, there's ebbs and flows, and performance is really based on what matters to you, right? And when we're clear on what it is that is truly important to us and how we can allocate our time and energy accordingly, you can feel productive doing less.
It's you mentioned flow, the flow research people and Steve Kotler, and how do we intentionally create a situation and environment for flow, for that deep creativity? And many people might experience that in different areas, different ways, certain sports, certain moments, certain times when it's happened where, wow, everything seems to just work. It seems to happen. And there are procedures and there are processes that we can put in place to give the best opportunity for that to exist. Whilst it doesn't, whether dealing with getting to different brainwave states or all of these kind of things, we can still use very simple stuff, right? Breath work, reframing, perspective, language around there. My last question I've got for you, and it's a question I've asked every guest, and I know it's going to be really good for you because you've mentioned so many things around curiosity, and it's linked around curiosity. And it's, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
You know, I feel like this is a trick question because I feel like when do we not ever have an old experience? Because every time we see something, it's rare to find that we're in an exact same combination of emotions, thoughts, and experiences and memories.
It's an impossibility, right? In
Right. So just
reality.
talking
Yeah.
to you right now and having this experience is new to me, right?
Yeah.
But I think just to answer your question, basically, when was the
I
last time
love that
tried
approach. I love that approach, by the way. And it's really, really valuable.
when was the last time I intentionally tried to change my behavior was when I started putting my phone outside the room before I went to bed. So I realized, I recognize how much time I'm spending on my phone when you're just waking up first thing in the morning, you scroll and email and kind of 30 minutes goes by and you're like, oh, what happened in the morning? And to kind of combat that, I decided to, okay, I'm gonna put this outside the room. And first I started with putting it out on the hallway right outside the room. And then I started putting it in downstairs in the kitchen. And so my habit became that, okay, I'm gonna have a yoga mat before I go to bed so I can have my workout session ready. And I'm gonna wake up in the morning, change into my clothes and do a workout. When I go down to my kitchen to get some protein shake, that's when I get my phone. So that's when I get reunited with the phones. And it's it's kind of a mind trick. Like, okay, I'm making this happen so that I don't automatically do, trying to unlearn that habit of looking at my phone immediately when I wake up.
I love that. And it reminds me of a conference I went to with Arianna Huffington from the Huffington Post, a company called Thrive Global. And they were talking about a electronics bed, right? And physical, in the same way you would tuck your child in at night and tuck them in, is your phone had a little bed, you'd plug it in, you'd say good night, and you'd leave it in a different room in the house, right? And you'd then go off to your bed of this disconnect. So I love that. I've gone through phases. I've gone through phases of it. I must admit, at the moment, I'm very bad. It's right next to me, and it's the first thing I do in the morning. And I guess it's about the intentionality of, is it serving you or not serving you at the phase in your life or not? What are you using it for? Is it something that's additive? For me, it's my quick learn. I'll read some news. I'll do those pieces. I've avoided 2-3 years ago. I deleted Facebook. I came off there. I did those sorts of things. So I've shifted maybe not just the full habit of phone there, but I shifted what I do with the phone slightly in me. But I do think I've got more work to do on that for sure. If people want to get in touch with you, if they're curious about connecting with your work, if they want to go deeper, what's the best way they can get in touch, Nuri?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. I have a website, goalsunhindered.com. And I have all socials, so see you
Wonderful.
one of the forum.
I deeply appreciate our time. It's been fascinating. I've learned loads, and I've got some. Do you know what? I'm going to try. I'm not going to try, because there's either do or don't do. I will remove my phone for the month of April from my room when I go to bed. I'm going to make that commitment to you, because you've inspired me to do that. And I think that will be very good for my health and my future. So thank you.
I love that. Thank you very much for having me.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review, and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.